Welcome to this explainer. Today we're going to dive into what has got to be one of history's most gripping and honestly bizarre anomalies. We're looking at a perfectly clean, circular hole in an ancient hominid skull that has literally puzzled researchers for a century. The Broken Hill Skull, or Kabwe 1 as it's officially known, presents us with a physical impossibility that practically begs for a wild explanation. Okay, let's get right into it and figure out exactly why a 300,000-year-old skull looks for all the world like it took a bullet to the head.
I know. It sounds like a completely impossible question. But when you actually look at the infamous Broken Hill skull, it's the exact sci-fi scenario your brain immediately jumps to. You see this perfectly round puncture right on the left side of the cranium, and your modern instinct tells you, well, only a high-velocity projectile could make a hole that neat. But how could that even be possible hundreds of thousands of years before gunpowder was even a thought?
To really get why this 300,000-year-old skull hole is such a massive deal, we got to go back to the discovery itself. It was pulled from a lead and zinc mine roughly 60 to 90 feet underground back in 1921 in northern Rhodesia, which is modern-day Zambia. It was actually discovered by an unnamed African miner working under a Swiss supervisor named Tom Zwiglar. And at the time, this was the first great fossil proof of ancient humanity in Africa. But there's a huge catch. By the time scientists realized what they had on their hands, the original site, the so-called bone cave, had been completely destroyed by industrial mining. So they permanently erased all contextual clues. It's like having a locked room mystery, but someone bulldozed the room before the detectives arrived.
So, without that context, human imagination just ran wild. The internet has heavily seized on this perfectly circular hole, spawning some truly incredible fringe theories over the years. We're talking claims of time travelers showing up with firearms, or maybe ancient, highly advanced civilizations wielding proto-firearm technology. Some even suggested a freak micrometeorite impact. And it doesn't help that these theories often point to this other anomalous fossilized aurochs skull found in Russia that reportedly has an almost identical circular hole. But let's step back and look at the hard forensic science, because it quickly dismantles the whole sci-fi angle. If we think about the physics of an actual bullet strike, a high-velocity projectile entering a bone wouldn't just leave a neat little hole on one side. It would cause massive shattering, radiating fracture lines all over the place, and, most importantly, an explosive exit wound on the completely opposite side of the cranium. And that right there is the fatal flaw in the time traveler theory. The Broken Hill skull completely lacks an exit wound, and the surrounding bone isn't shattered at all.
So what really happened? Well, the brutal reality is arguably way more fascinating and terrifying than a gunshot. When paleopathologists studied the skull directly, they found signs of healing and calcification right around the edges of the hole. This is absolutely crucial because it means this individual actually survived the injury for quite some time. The true cause? A massive chronic bone infection. It likely stemmed from severe dental disease and an ear infection that literally ate through his skull from the inside out. He wasn't shot, he lived in absolute agony while an infection rotted away his temporal bone. And just to put a bow on it, that Russian work skull? It also shows signs of natural pathology and healing, not a projectile strike.
Section 1. Rewriting History. The Family Tree.
Okay, so with the impossible bullet hole solved, let's zoom out a bit. We need to see how this skull is currently upending pretty much everything we thought we knew about human evolution. Because that original cave was destroyed, dating the skull was a massive headache for researchers. For nearly a century, scientists were indirectly estimating the skull was about 500,000 years old. But a major breakthrough finally arrived in a 2020 Nature study. They used direct uranium series isotope dating on the skull itself, proving it's actually much younger, around 299,000 years old, give or take 25,000 years.
So why does that revised date matter so much? Because it completely rewrites the narrative. This younger date means that three very different human species potentially coexisted in Africa at the exact same time. You had early Homo sapiens, Homo naledi, and whatever species Kabwe 1 represents, all sharing the same continent. It raises these massive open questions for paleoanthropologists. Is this specific hominid our direct ancestor, or just a separate, parallel branch of the human family tree that eventually died out?
And as if the evolutionary questions weren't enough, the skull is also sitting right at the center of a fierce modern academic debate over its very name. Historically, the species was named Homo rhodesiensis, honoring the imperialist colonizer Cecil Rhodes. Recently, though, in 2022, some researchers proposed decolonizing the name to Homo bodoensis. They argue that science really needs to distance itself from that socio-political baggage.
But on the other side of the aisle, opposing scientists fiercely argue that changing established taxonomic names for political or social reasons actually violates strict zoological naming codes. They insist that taxonomy must remain entirely separate from politics. It's a highly heated, ongoing debate within the scientific community today.
Section 2. Diplomatic Standoff. The Repatriation Fight.
Zooming out even further from the scientific debates, we find ourselves squarely in the middle of a live, unresolved 50-year geopolitical battle over who actually owns the Broken Hill skull. Since 1972, Zambia has formally demanded the skull's return from London's Natural History Museum, which is where it's been since shortly after it was discovered. Zambia's legal case rests on a 1912 colonial law called the Bushman Relics Proclamation. This law required a specific permit to remove cultural or human remains from the territory, and Zambia claims no such permit was ever issued. Recently, a 2025 UNESCO resolution even mandated that the UK and Zambia sit down and develop a roadmap for the skull's return, but negotiations continually deadlock. As of today, Zambia only has a replica on display.
Now, the hesitation from the UK side is deeply rooted in institutional precedent. This rather chilling 1982 British Foreign Office memo perfectly captures their historical reluctance. The memo literally argued that returning the skull would set an evil precedent. This directly echoes other major disputes, like the Parthenon marbles, expressing a deep institutional fear that if they return Kabwe 1, it's going to open the floodgates for repatriation claims on countless other artifacts held in British museums.
Section 3. A Toxic Legacy. Kabwe Today.
But the ultimate twist in this explainer brings us right back to the present day. The Kabwe mine officially closed down in 1994, but urgent NGO reports, particularly some incredibly sobering stuff from Human Rights Watch, reveal that decades of industrial lead and zinc extraction left behind an ongoing catastrophic public health disaster, and it's affecting the nearly 200,000 people living in the contaminated zone today. Unearthing this history came with a terrible, terrible environmental price. Just look at that number, 6.4 million. That staggering figure represents the tons of toxic lead waste left behind just sitting in the open. It was never fully cleaned up by the mining operations after they shut down. It is an environmental footprint of massive proportions, and it's directly impacting the local ecosystem and the people who call it home.
And the human cost here is even more heartbreaking. Recent reports show that over 95% of children living near the former mine site have severely elevated blood lead levels. Think about that. About half of these kids urgently need medical treatment. And yet, reports from 2025 indicate that the government is reportedly still issuing new processing licenses for hazardous waste in the area, which is only worsening the exposure.
So we're really left with a haunting irony here. Science managed to figure out exactly why there is a hole in a 300,000-year-old skull, revealing this incredible story of survival and suffering. But the very ground that gave the world such vital clues about our ancient origins is now actively poisoning the descendants of the unnamed miner who found it. It really leaves us to wonder, as nations fight over the bones of the past, who is going to take responsibility for this modern tragedy unfolding right now? Thanks so much for joining me on this deep dive. It really makes you look at history and the ground beneath our feet in a completely different light, doesn't it? See you next time.